The following is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Hey folks, P. Basardo here, and you're listening to the Smoke Free Radio Network.
That was interesting.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Vaping and the Mic. I'm Mike Peterson. This evening, we have an absolute outstanding guest that is going to be joining us. I'll tell you what, for people that have been on the web and been watching Regulator Watch and Regulator Watch Canada, you've been able to see him use a very gifted talent to be able to come across and interview people, to get information out to people, to do what he does. He is the executive producer for Regulator Watch, and he has been talking to some amazing people and has some outstanding insights. And it is, honestly, it is my pleasure this evening. Everybody, if you would, please welcome our guest this evening, Mr. Brent Stafford.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much.
Oh, it is an awesome kind of pleasure to have you here this evening. I really appreciate you taking time to join me.
Not a problem, not a problem.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I really have. You have an amazing kind of style when you are working as the executive producer as well as reporter and all the other hats that you have to wear while you're doing what you do. How is it that you manage, at some points in time, to keep your cool or a neutral approach to things when you're dealing with people that you might, honestly, your opinions might clash with them?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for those kind words and the kind words that you share a lot online and on Facebook about Reg Watch content. I have to, it's interesting because offline, I don't keep my cool that often. You know, I tend to really kind of explode. And I'm certain that that does show through in the show. And certainly in some interviews, I think that you can see that I get a bit exercised. The best answer that I can give for that is that I'm the guy that controls the editing. So whereas I might do a whole hour interview and there might be some chunks in there that I've really kind of gone off, on a tangent, I can bring it back in editing. And I know that when I'm doing the interview. And so if you've been on the other end of one of my interviews that is a bit more free flowing, you'll get that. Like there'll be chunks there where I kind of dishevel myself a little bit in a manner in which disarms the interview subject to the point where it gets them more comfortable and better able to talk. Mm-hmm. And that's how I can really pull the sound bites out, which usually happens, of course, later in the interview.
And I've noticed that because when you are speaking with people, I've watched people that you've interviewed, even though you have edited the interview, I've watched them start to where they are a stone-faced person, or their butt cheeks are clenched so hard, that they're sitting there going, "Ooh!" And 5 minutes later, you're talking with them, and you see them visibly relax. So that to me is a very amazing kind of gift or talent. It really is, because there's not a lot of people that can do that, to be able to take vocabulary and get somebody to relax.
Sure. Thank you. And let me add to that, to get them to do that without completely kissing their ass. That's the thing, right?
See, that's one of the questions. When you run into somebody that has a very hardcore opposing viewpoint from you, how do you manage to still get the information that you need out of them without A, actually really making them angry, or B, making you look bad?
Okay, good question. I think that it starts with how RegWatch first started. In terms of its raison d'etre, has always been to share a point of view, and that point of view being of the editorial staff being me.
Mm-hmm.
Why I've created RegWatch. And it's not that everybody goes to the about section, but if I get guff or anything like that, I'll always point them to the about section of RegWatch. And we are, as far as I know, still the only media platform that publishes their news values. So if you want to know why certain stories get on our show or on our website, you can certainly glean that from our news values. They're pretty upfront. And so right off the bat, that's how we construct it. But so our position is that you can have a point of view, but still be fact-based. Mm-hmm. You can have a point of view and still be curious and inquisitive and conduct interviews in which you can pull the other side out, so at least we can all kind of see it and put it out there for dialogue. It's not about objectivity and balance, it's about fairness. And I think when you look at it that way, that kind of really drives our content. And I tell you, that should be how most content is driven, because the idea that anything can be objective is false. And that's partly got us into the place where we are today, where people are screaming fake news. News has always been fake. I mean, news has always got one side or the other. And is the bias buried in the structure of the medium, a la Marshall McLuhan, of course, and the medium is the message. So is the bias, buried in the structure of the medium? Is the bias buried within the structure of how the medium is financed? So an advertising model, a subscription model, backroom, funded by the oil industry, tobacco, all that kinds of things. The fact of the matter is that content has to be paid for, and it's always going to be influenced by, the owner or who's funding it or whatever in some way. Or the medium and the technology is going to bias it. So this concept that it's objective and that there are these just basic sterile facts out there are wrong. And we see that tons in the vaping conversation when you look at the research. And even the research that does go through the peer review process still can come out the other side and be junk science, purported to be facts. So,
and it is one thing that I have noticed many different times, is the interviews, all of the content that you have on Regulator Watch and Regulator Watch Canada is not a guerrilla style interviewing. You're not poking the bear trying to gather a very specific response to frame your narrative. You're actually there trying to gather as much of a viewpoint as you can, and you're allowing your audience to actually make up their own mind, which, again, most interviewers are not doing anymore.
Well, I do appreciate that. I personally probably think I'm more biased than the neutrality that you talk about. And it's not just you, others have brought that up too. And so that, I think that's a testament to my 30 years in the business, because even I'm still bothered by, sometimes about how much on one side I happen to be. And so, but let me share this, and I've shared it a couple of times before in the past, but it's worth me sharing again, is that the very first vaping piece that RegWatch did in 2015, in the fall of 2015, that was the real, Magna Carta, we did for vaping. What is this issue, and where does it stand? And when I was writing, I said, okay, I can't equivocate here, because that's the whole point. Don't equivocate. So when I wrote for the first time in a script, vaping is not smoking, that's such a definitive statement that it triggered all of my journalistic sensibilities, very old sensibilities now, I guess, but it triggered all of them. And I had a hard time writing it. And there I am deep, in this first piece, and we have a model. And here I'm faced with this choice. And I literally said to myself, okay, if this was climate change and I was working for a mainstream broadcaster, like I have for many, many years, right? What would I be saying? Would I equivocate on climate change, or would I be writing definitively that climate change is a thing? And of course, I'd be writing definitively that climate change is a thing if I was working for mainstream, news. And so as soon as I said that, I go, well, that's it. I'm going to be reporting on vaping like they report on climate change. And that's kind of where I've come in terms of the equivocation. However, vaping side on my side is filled with facts. The climate change side is poison science. But anyhow, that's another story.
And it's true, because the things that you're reporting on in the vapor industry, people are looking at what you're saying and balancing or judging versus what they think they know and coming away with a different aspect, a different viewpoint. Which brings me to another question. In your interviews that you have done, did you ever begin an interview where somebody was absolutely adamant in what they were saying or doing, and somewhere through the interview that they began to change their opinion and their viewpoint to not necessarily align more with what you were saying, but they were finally getting what was really going on?
Right. That's a good question. So it's a nuance. Let me bring it back first to tie into what was your question in terms of they're totally connected. So I think it's important to state right off the bat that anybody who might seem to be naturally opposed to the pro-vaping point of view, being on side of vaping, for instance, they've already taken a really good look at Reg Watch and our position and our coverage and have made a decision that it's important for them to be on it, which is great, because they want to speak to our viewers, which of course are vapors in America, vapors in Canada, definitely some in the UK, and in a smattering around the world. Big thing is that a ton of the research community does watch Reg Watch. So we can make news there, as you've seen. And then, of course, government and insiders do too as well. So when somebody comes on the show that's not particularly on side of vaping, they're doing it for a reason. And I, that's awesome, because they want to reach our audience. So, but it does make the interview a bit difficult. That's kind of the deadpan you're talking about to a certain extent. I think that you're not trying to poke them. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get them to state their opinion or their position instead of opinion, because in some cases, of course, say with Health Canada and Director General James Van Loon, these are actual official positions of the government on key issues, whether that's nicotine, gateway, epidemic, and so forth, right? And so what's important is that you get them to feel that they have adequately or more than adequately been able to state their position, get them to find a couple of ways around it. You kind of nudge them along it. And what you're hoping for with the interview is that as it progresses, you get them to realize that in a later answer that they're contradicting something that they've already said. You want the interview subject to have dissonance during the interview with what they've talked about. And that's where I think that's the important part of the interview. I don't want to say it's the win, but it is the win, because it's not gotcha. In fact, the audience might not even know, though sometimes, most of the times they do, because our interviews are structured around that. So that's the key thing. If you can get an interview subject to experience cognitive dissonance with something that they've already said in the interview, then you're likely to get some good stuff.
And that is an amazing quality, because I don't know, when you are doing that type of an interview and you know that it can go either way very quickly, how did you learn when to stop pushing a question before it either exploded, the interview might have gone to hell? Where did you learn to say this is far enough?
Well, I mean, I was blessed to start in television really when I was still in high school, amazingly enough. And then when I got out of high school, I went straight to work for a CBC affiliate. So this is kind of stuff that's been in my blood for a long time. But I'm not an ass kisser, right? So that's the thing. So it's hard for me to say, There are other people out there that I think they're better at empathizing and connecting on that emotional level or whatever. I think on my side, it does come down to the dissonance thing, because there are some interviews that you simply must make sure that the interview subject feels like that they're getting every opportunity to answer the questions the way they want to get their points across, right? And so, and your whole goal is to make sure that those points are there on record so your audience can hear them. In so many cases, certainly with an issue like vaping, what's interesting about this is that even when the answers contain information that is brutal for the industry and the vapor, it's very important for the vapor and the industry and the community to hear that coming from somebody who's such a high official. So that's a win in and of itself, is because you're getting it there, they're putting it out on the table, and then it can be dealt with. You know, I know that we're going to talk a little bit about the leaked documents, and the document that was leaked to RegWatch, the draft paper of the research by Dr. David Hammond at the University of Waterloo, which we published. And that was published primarily in part because James Van Loon, the Director General of Health Canada, made it explicitly clear that that the research had been shared with Health Canada by Dr. Hammond, that the research was alarming, that the research in its summary form at least, was shared with the Minister of Health, who also found it alarming. And in our interview, the Director General of the Tobacco Control Directorate said that it gave substantive cause for the concern that led to the consultations that we're now seeing. So when you have that high of an impact, that it became a matter of public interest for us to release that draft research paper when it became available to us.
When you received that information, were there bits and pieces of that that either alarmed you, or that you may have read something that you did not expect? Or was it pretty much the government has said one thing over here, and here we are, here's what this paper is saying?
Right. Well, the government has no involvement with that draft paper, right? That was a research paper done by Dr. Hammond, which did get shared, of course, with in some form or another with Health Canada. So in regard to what was in the paper, RegWatch has yet to actually provide any commentary on that at all. We, from a mere editorial perspective, from the ones that released and published that paper, we made a choice right off of the bat, which you can tell from our video that we released the actual paper, and we didn't provide any analysis, and we still haven't. We had, of course, one expert come on, who's worldwide expert, Claude Bates, and he had a lot to say about the paper. I mean, that we can talk about a bit, but RegWatch is not going to provide an opinion on that paper. And here's why. The paper is in draft form. So how do we know if it's fact or not? It has not yet gone through. The double-edged sword about this is that it is an unpeer-reviewed paper, meaning the facts have not yet gone through the rigorous academic process that must be applied to them in order for the fact-making process to unfold. Because facts are, anyone can just grab facts. The whole idea about academic research is that it goes through a fact-making process. And the peer review journal process is integral to that, and they fail so often now. But that being said, the paper had not yet gone through that, and the draft that we got, of course, was not the final paper. So it must be released, and researchers and others who have expert knowledge in the area, and vapors who read it, and everybody else can make comments on it. RegWatch won't, because we released it, and because it's not fact.
Were you at any point in time worried of legal ramifications that might happen to you for releasing that document when it was clearly something people did not want the public to see?
You're right. Well, no. I mean, if something can be clearly demonstrated, we're an established news organization in Canada. I mean, if we weren't, why is the Director General of the Tobacco Control Directorate inviting us to Ottawa to sit down for an interview? Did twice, two of them, in the week before that we released that paper. And of course, the previous Director General, Susie McDonald, had us in Ottawa 2 years before that. So, I mean, if, it's just insane to not, just because we're online or something like that, or we're not traditional, that we aren't an established Canadian news organization. And we are. And we have a duty to our viewers, a real duty, to publish what something like this that is so clearly in the public interest. Again, if it wasn't for the fact that officials from Health Canada made it absolutely clear that paper had provided substantial cause for concern, which led to these regulatory consultations that are going on right now, or just finished up the last one. If it was not for that, well, we wouldn't have published it. But if it wasn't for that, it's likely that the person who also is a highly placed expert in academia in the entire tobacco control world is the person who leaked it to us. So it's likely it wouldn't even have been leaked to us if it wasn't for the fact that it had been clearly demonstrated through our coverage and through the comments that Health Canada made, and clearly that Dr. Hammond had done in the media, and the amount of coverage that had been given to the conclusions or suppositions in that paper. If it wasn't for all of that, we wouldn't have been publishing it, and it wouldn't have been leaked to us.
Wow. Hey, did you, or have you since then, received any kind of backlash for releasing that information?
Well, I mean, what I can say is what we've published on Reg Watch, of course, is that the day after, the University of Waterloo Legal Department did send us a cease and desist letter, and we responded immediately that day with a 5-page, document that completely took the reader through our argument, and it's available up on regulatorwatch.com. You can find it very easily. And we went through this whole argument step by step about why it was our duty to publish it, all the arguments that I just gave you right now, with links and transcripts and so forth. And that's that. And we did take measures. We took down the paper. We took down the paper. I provided some masking on the original video so you can see the paper. But we left up the stories on Facebook and stuff like that, because as soon as people were commenting on stuff, well, it's not fair to our viewers to have yanked that down. But pretty much the paper was available on our website for, I don't know, max 24 hours, and then we yanked it. And we haven't heard back from the University of Waterloo, and I don't expect to. I mean, I think that we did our job, they did their job, and, we move on.
You mentioned a little bit earlier talking about facts and peer review and actual science review. How did that come across when you had the opportunity and you had taken the opportunity to do an interview with Mr. Glantz?
Mr. Glantz, that's that. Well, let me just say this about Glantz, Professor Glantz, that he's genuine to his personality. He's genuine to his position on the issues. I mean, he's just frank. He just laughs and doesn't. He literally, I don't care what you think. I don't care what anybody thinks. This is what I'm saying about e-cigarettes, and it's a pronouncement from up high, and I'm the man up high, and that's just the way it is. And I'm not overstating it that way. Wow. He is exactly how he comes across in terms of his ego and in terms of his sense of self-worth.
That tells me an awful lot. And I'm sure anybody that's watching or listening, if you know anything about Professor Glantz, and I'm sure a lot of people in the chat room online, they know, That had to be a very either interesting or difficult interview for you.
Well, I mean, again, it really isn't at all. I mean, maybe frustrating. I think maybe there's in some cases, but I mean, again, like it's important to get their point of view across on the show. I always know that I'm going to get a couple of good questions in there. I'm going to move them along somewhere or another. And now, but he's a rock. So I can say that in other really big interviews we've had with people who are not on side with vaping, I can say that with them, I know that I have definitely created that cognitive dissonance that I was talking about. That's just essential for that. With him, no way.
Wow.
There's no way, because he is a pure activist. He is an ideologue. And he would not be offended by that. I'm certain of that. So
in and of itself, he's so secure in who he is and he doesn't care that he's almost inflappable, is what you're saying.
Well, that's right. Inflappable is a perfect term. Yes. So keep in mind, with pure ideologues on the activist side, it really does mean that you are absolved of any tactic as long as the tactic gets you to the end. So it really is an ends justify the means scenario, right?
Yeah.
If you look at it, it was his research that really created the connection, like the heart research and the secondhand smoke, right? So there's his heart research, then there's the secondhand smoke thing that all come together. And I mean, it always comes back down to Professor Glantz. And, that research has been, I believe, you might know this better than I do, and I'm going to embarrass myself here because this is a little bit buried, but I don't know if it was like Huffington Post. Let's just say it was something like Huffington Post. It was definitely on the progressive left side. And they did a piece, this would have been like 2 or 3 years ago. And this is how much we can't even discuss this. And Reg Watch hasn't even discussed this yet, because it'd be like batting like a hornet's nest, covered in honey, right? But there has definitely been progressive left work done that is called into question Professor Glantz's research on secondhand smoke, and once that. If that was to really crack, it's that research there. It was that ability in the late 90s and early 2000s for the anti-smoking activists with Glantz and everyone else on his side. He's the research provider to the whole effort. If it wasn't for that, they wouldn't have been able to make the argument that smoking harmed other people. So it's that thing. You can't take away somebody's liberty to do something, putting something in their own body, unless you can prove that what they're doing is harming somebody else. Right. And up until then, that smoking never crossed that line. And it was secondhand smoke that did that. And once that fell, it all fell. And from there, precautionary principle comes in, where the science doesn't even need to be good before then you have to start banning things, just if you think that there could be a problem. That's where what about the kids really comes into, because it's all of the other effects. So if Glantz had not been able to get away with those studies, it would be a different world right now.
And that I don't think that people have a real appreciation for it. This is an oddity of the vapor industry. We all talk amongst ourselves, and we try to do what you are doing with Regulator Watch, is get the news to more of the mainstream public, because the public is only guided by what they're seeing from left, right, anti-vaporing, whatever. They watch whatever morning show that they see, and they see Surgeon General spouting stuff, or FDA, but they don't have a much more of a truthful aspect. And if people could understand some of the damage that Glantz has truly done, they might change their mind. Which brings me to the next question that I have for you. You did an interview with a gentleman, Dr. David Abrams, and he very clearly in your interview was, for lack of better words, pro-vaping.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything in the interview that you did with him, was there any information that took you by surprise, or his demeanor, or his ability to say, yes, I believe in this?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. There's a bunch of things that came out of that interview. For one thing, I was a bit surprised that about, what's the right word? It's not his stature, but his eminence. I mean, he is got a massive reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Yet at that time, in our 3 years of covering the story, his name had only just kind of like cracked into our consciousness. Not really much at all, right? I was really shocked to go, who's this guy? And when the big paper came out last September in October, and then obviously partnered with the epidemic statement and hysteria from then Commissioner Gottlieb, it became really, it was imperative to get him on the show. And when I got him on the show, what was surprising for me is that I don't think that you could characterize his position on vaping as lukewarm. I think you could characterize his position on vaping as full on. I mean, he absolutely, I mean, he said it in our show. I put together a couple of quotes here. Let me just see here from the show. And so for one, he says this is in regard to the data the FDA said that they had for the epidemic. And he says that we have not yet seen the data. So this was the first interview that we had with somebody of that stature coming on and saying, hey, look, man, this data is like, we haven't seen it. We don't know what it is. And he says that, he says it's a tricky thing to thread this needle to protect our kids as much as possible while ensuring that these innovative breakthrough products could really be readily available to help smokers who are unable to stop smoking to switch to a much less harmful alternative. So, I mean, there it is. I mean, he definitely is full on with it. More though, when it comes to, he goes, with nicotine, he says, the truth is that we have no strong evidence that nicotine damages the brain at all. These come from animal studies, which you can often not easily generalize to humans. And then with regard to, and thank you for providing me your questions, by the way. So I've just pulled the exact bites to make sure that I nail what you were asking about. So it was really kind of touching part of the interview when he was gearing up to make what would be, I would say, a fairly full-throated recommendation for vaping. The question in the air being, would you recommend vaping? And he said, well, I've got a 14-year-old granddaughter, and that's how he started it. And
yes.
Yeah, very important, right? For him to start it that way. And he was very meaningful about it. And he says, I would recommend any smoker try to switch and find an e-cigarette product and a sweet spot that allows them to switch. And the sweet spot is really the key thing. They had this paper out around 6 months before, and they felt that it was so important with all of the hysteria that was coming out that they reissue the report with an update and to more strongly focus on key areas in this report. The report was so already strongly in favor of e-cigarettes and vaping as a tool for harm reduction. And then the update that they did, which came out then in early October, which was designed basically to hammer down on some areas in order to contrast with the FDA epidemic statement. And so this idea of the sweet spot was something that that Dr. Abrams had made clear, at least in the long part of our interview. I'm not certain it made it into the full one. It's just it's a bit of information that it's important for us to talk about now, but might not have made it into the piece. It's that sweet spot language was really important. So it was the continuum of risk, which they wanted to more focus on, and then start talking about the sweet spot, which is what they did in this report. And so let me just finish up on this. Right. So he did say it. The evidence has gotten so much stronger that we felt we had to update our annual review of public health within 6 months of publishing it. We also felt that we needed to take some stronger language to challenge what we regard as extremely weak science. Here's a scientist now calling the science that's out there that's saying that there's an epidemic of e-cigarette use as weak science. So that's significant language. Weak science that has been exaggerated to create this misinformation about the harms of e-cigarettes in particular and the harms of nicotine as well. So, I mean, definitely really, really strong. Well, look, I'm going to read the last one. So I asked him, I said, well, are they lying? And he says, lying may be a strong word. And I think the issue is that they simply omit the most important facts. And that creates a dramatic misperception of the harms without balancing benefits. That is regarded as misinformation and disinformation in the strongest sense of the word. Errors of omission are as important in consumer protection law. And often when you don't say what you should be saying, that's where words like consumer fraud get raised if you are a commercial company. I think we should all be taking care to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And I think that was, you asked in the questions that you sent me, if there was something that surprised me out of that interview with Dr. Abrams. And it really was that. I mean, I remember when he said it, I went, how come nobody else is talking about that way, right? Could you imagine a class action lawsuit from, consumers because they're, and they could prove that? I don't think that particular kind of lawsuit, I know that there has been lawsuits out there that have talked about the consumer and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But there was just something, the way that David Abrams had just said that, I just went, man, if you had like people like David Abrams getting behind a class action lawsuit like that would really make it happen. So
it was I was blown away by the interview that you had with him, because his stature, the credentials that he has are almost as unassailable as you can get. He is not just some doctor that rolled off of the assembly line. That was a man that is well-known, well-respected, has credentials from many different areas. And the things that he was saying, just like talking about his 14-year-old granddaughter, to a point of saying, I would rather have her vape. That blew me away. I was like, holy mackerel, okay, this is just an awesome kind of thing.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no, go right ahead. We're going to wrap this little segment up. I've got to do our... You see, my brain is running so hard on so many other questions. I have to take time to do our sponsor slot here real quick.
Okay.
When we come back, I want to talk to you about something that just came out of the Truth Initiative. And then I've got a couple of questions that I didn't have a chance to frame or narrate. Nothing hard. But for everybody that's in the chat room, please, if you want, the phone lines are open tonight. If you have a question that you would like to ask Brent, the phone lines are open, 215-383-5752. Don't be afraid to get on the call. When you hear the English lady's accent, make sure that you press 1 to get on the queue so that I can look over here on the other screen on the laptop and see that you're there. And we'll try to get you on the air. But we'll be right back, because without our sponsors, we couldn't do what we do.
Hey now, this is Dimitri with Smoke Free Radio, reminding you to please show some love to our wonderful sponsors. Without them, there would be no Smoke Free Radio, and they are as follows. All the way from Florida, Moon Mountain Vapor, with locations in Florida, and their liquid available for wholesale and retail, moonmountainvapor.com. Some of the best custards and tobaccos on the market from the Brickwills Vaping Company. the lovely Shell with a vapor bar, locations in Texas, Virginia, and West Virginia. And of course online at thevaporbar.com. And who says you can't have award-winning e-liquid without cartoon characters? That's exactly what you're going to get at theplumeroom.com. And finally, of course, the Vaping Advocate magazine that has generously provided the telephone lines for you to communicate with us. Thank you for your support. And finally, for you, the listener, don't forget to check out the coupons and codes page on Smoke Free Radio. Pick up some e-liquid and save some money. From all of us here at Smoke Free Radio, thank you for your continued support.
Hey folks, P. Basardo here, and you're listening to Vaping and the Mic with Mike Peterson.
Coming back from our sponsor break, this evening's guest is the executive director from Regulator Watch. Now, believe it or not, folks, he is all the way in Vancouver, Canada. Okay, so you've got to understand, this man is covering the vaping industry scene here in the United States, and he's not even a citizen of this country. That's how much he has a passion for doing what he does. It's incredible. Brent, I really...
And Mike, let me just say about that. I'm glad you brought that up. The key thing here is that everybody needs to realize that if things don't get sorted in the U.S., what happens in the U.S. ripples completely across the world. So in Canada, so much. We heard it in our interview with Health Canada. They mentioned U.S. research over and over and over again. They wouldn't even actually say that it's an epidemic. They would refer to the fact, Commissioner Scott Gottlieb called it an epidemic. So it's always driven by the U.S. We saw that in 2015. In early 2016, we were already saying to our supporters, who were Canadian supporters, that we need to start covering U.S. stories. And they were like, why? And I'm like, because if we aren't covering U.S. stories, we aren't covering the things that are driving what's going on in Canada. And that's clearly been the case, and it's still going to be the case. And let me just say that the irony is that 90% of, maybe more, like 95% of our U.S. coverage has been funded by our Canadian supporters because they feel so strongly in that position. Now, we'd like to get more funding from U.S. supporters. It's really hard to get Americans to open their wallet and care.
Now, let me ask you, since you bring that up, please tell me and all the people that are listening and will listen on the podcast, how can they help support you and Regulator Watch?
Sure. If you're just an individual fan, right now, the best thing to do is just go to our website. There's a donate button right there on the homepage up at the top. And that takes you to a secured way to make a one-time donation, or you can have it set up for reoccurring. It's just through PayPal. And so it's clean and it's simple. And that is like a fantastic way to do it. We do have a Patreon account. I set that up about a year ago. It's got a lot of tiers with a whole bunch of stuff. We would really like to broaden out our support to where we're supported by more people than instead of just putting it on the onus on the industry. The thing I was hoping to have for today already, an answer for this, for kind of like the long-term fan funding kind of the thing. But I have to tell you, the reason why that we haven't gotten behind our Patreon account at all is just a couple of months, maybe 3 months after I kind of just got it up, was just gearing up to do that. Patreon started kicking off all of the conservatives that they didn't like, who for free speech, right? And they just kicking everybody off. And so I started looking, and it's not like, well, vaping, we know, does twinge the sensibilities of the progressives. And so that in and of itself could be an issue. However, I don't know. But Reg Watch also has other things to cover. And we are going to be moving into some free speech issues, and we are going to be talking about the censorial, attitude out there. And so, I've been concerned about that. It has stifled my speech before I've even started, because I've been unsure of our funding model. When we move into that kind of coverage, I'm going to have some coverage in the next couple of days coming out of our trip to Prager Summit, the PragerU Summit in California earlier this month, that featured Jordan Peterson and Candace Owens and stuff. And I mean, really, the whole story that's there is the fact that PragerU, which has received over 2 billion views on its videos in the last 3 years, and they're all conservative videos, or traditional pro-Western civilization videos, pro-Israel videos, pro-America videos, that kind of thing, fact-based, of course. And, they've got over 100 videos on YouTube that YouTube has restricted. Things that you just, what are you talking about? So we're going to be covering that issue. And the other connecting part about that is that this really is an issue with regard to socialism, and how the activists, on that side are pushing to censor speech, and they're winning. So I'd love to be able to say to you right now, please go to Patreon and let's get a group there and let's start to really make it happen. But I'm unsure whether or not, if down the road I'm going to have a problem with Patreon. So that being said, you definitely can support us, and it will help for sure. And it's just on our donation page, secure payment on our website. And then lastly, if you're a business, and especially a U.S. business, we're going to have some Canadian stuff coming along down the road soon, which I'll be talking about. But if you're an American vape shop or chain of vape shops, e-juice company, and you've got $1,500 or $2,000 a month to spend, that's the right number for you to be able to help us. We can then give you a whole bunch of our traditional in video exposure and a whole bunch of love that we can't give to our Canadian supporters anymore because of the new law.
Wow. And that, for people that don't know, Brent is sitting in front of a massive bank of material that it's an amazing amount of equipment that he has to do his show. And that's the shot right there. If people take a look at that, it's amazing how much equipment that you have to do what you do. That's it. So when you were talking about sponsorship, it's not just because that's, I'd like to put some money in my pocket. No, what you're doing is expensive. There is no doubt about it.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We've got a full television studio here in downtown Vancouver, right? So in this particular setup, it's multi-camera. We've just updated so we can do, our live broadcast streaming out of here. And then we've got 2 separate full EFP production kits. So we've got a full 4K production kit that I'm able to get into a suitcase and through customs and immigration at the U.S. border at the airport and fly down to anywhere in the U.S. and come back with, from an event and come back with, 4, 5, 6, 3-camera videos, which you've seen us do, at SFATA events and other events down in the U.S. So, and we'd love to be doing that more. We could be on a plane in a day's notice and anywhere in the U.S. and then come back with coverage. So, our coverage does a couple of things, and I think that's important to understand, is that we're the only media organization that I know that covers vaping, and we're the only ones that do it in television in this way. And we've been accredited by Facebook from the moment that we started as an accredited news organization. So, I went through a whole bunch of steps with Facebook even before we started our vaping coverage. And then so when the vaping coverage came in and the algorithms would kick up trouble with us, we reminded them who we were. And ever since then, we're the only ones that can do paid posts on Facebook. Wow. And so when you work with Reg Watch, we can at least guarantee that our coverage is going to get outside of the bubble. Mm-hmm. But that being said, that is a goal. That's a win. But we've been covering this now for so long. If you were just an outside viewer that didn't know anything about what we're talking about, you're going to have to get up to speed by watching, some of our coverage, because we're now in the weeds on the regulations. When we bring, like, say, a Dr. Tyndall on, for instance, we're not doing the 50,000, foot view. We're in, because our viewers are mature viewers now, right? So if you're a Reg Watch viewer, you likely are a pretty mature viewer. When I mean mature, I mean mature in terms of the issue. And so we actually have a bigger responsibility now to making sure that we're speaking to you and to researchers and to government. And so in a way, the audience is a little smaller because of our targeting, but our coverage is much more in depth and much more, in the weeds, for lack of a better term.
I'm going to segue for a moment into what the only way to phrase it is an opinion piece, because I would like to have your opinion on something, and this is the one that I didn't have a chance to talk with you about. In Ohio, we have the Ohio Vapers Trade Association, and it is one of the largest associations in the United States. And very recently, there was a Tobacco 21 piece of legislation that was going to go through, and they called for people to come and either be present or to give their story testament in front of, the legislative body. And there were not many people that showed up, nor has there been a massive output of emails, phone calls. It has become almost as if everybody in this association has become apathetic, to the point where making a statement and saying, we need you, everybody in the association, talk to your mother, your brother, your local shop, whoever you can, go to CASAW, fill out this short form. It doesn't take any bit. It's very short. Please help. How, being where you are and the interviewer that you are, how does that strike you, and what might you tell people that are kind of sitting back going, somebody else will take care of it?
All right.
That's why
you're asking for analysis on why that may be happening. Then you're also asking for the advice, what I would give.
Or just your opinion, however you'd like to phrase it. Because again, I did not have a chance, folks, to talk with him about this, so it's catching him off guard. And typically I'm not a person to do that, but it just struck me as I was sitting here that this is something of importance, because he said it earlier, what is happening in the United States does have an impact in other countries. It does have an impact in other places. So just in a nutshell, how does that make you feel, and what might you say to people, if I can put it that way?
Well, no problem. You're not catching me off guard. That's what you're supposed to do anyhow. So that's just real quickly. You were asking earlier, how do you get people? How do you take an interview to a point where it doesn't just devolve into something brutal and people storm out, right? And one way to do that is obviously properly outline the questions and topics and tone that you want to do with the interview. Which, what you did with me is something that I do even with the highest ends, right? Like when I make my outreach to Health Canada, to the media department, I make an argument for why they need to come on, and they get a list of what I'm looking to find out and talk about. Now, you can't deviate off that list too much. It's not like questions, but you have to be honest and fair. But that doesn't mean, though, that what you do is inside your prep, you provide a roadmap for that allows you to take it somewhere deeper and more challenging as the opportunity presents itself. So I wanted to make sure I got that in, because that was really important, right? Is that you can, and then you have to recognize that if you push down this particular area or that particular area too far, you would derail the interview. And it's more important to get them on record on all the things that matter, so your audience can hear that, and you can hope that when they go on record, that what they say is going to open up other avenues of coverage, which is what happened in the Health Canada interview, for instance. So with regard to Ohio, you're describing an issue that is it is a demonstration of the successful application of pressure and demoralization amongst the activists that are, anti-vaping. They, in every possible manner, in every possible way, they're seeking to demoralize their opponents. And so they're effectively doing that. And so with the barrage, the onslaught of all the research, and it's all very well timed. I mean, if nobody expected that there wouldn't be a huge, massive amount of propaganda coming out around the 10th anniversary of the Real Cost campaign, and least coordinated with media, and that's it. So it's going to demoralize people, and so that's natural. The other part, and I've talked about this at length, is that vapors eat their young, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got an internal amount of backbiting that happens. That's obviously connected to the fact that the only thing that really brings vapors together is the fact that they were ex-smokers, right? Otherwise, they come from a large variety of the population, and in some cases, it's easy to argue that they're likely to be more on the liberal, progressive left side, and so they're not naturally prone to accepting arguments that are anti-regulation, because if you're on that side of the political spectrum, you believe government, it regulates for the good. There's very few opportunities you could point to where somebody on the progressive left side is going to say, oh yeah, this is this bad regulation because it's bad regulation. You shouldn't have regulations here, and here. So regulations are supposed to be really good. And so there's a cognitive dissonance that happens there. So the anti-vaping activists are playing into that dissonance that's happening within inside vapors, and they're creating a lot of the backbiting and division. So my last point on that is Juul. Juul's success and the amount of pressure that's been brought to bear on the entire industry in the open systems section of the industry, which is the industry, right, is being used to also help demoralize. Because, for a lot of people, Juul's a decent product. It's one that really does fit the harm reduction ethos that almost everybody has had since day one. And so, Truth Initiative and the rest are kind of using that against the community, and it's really causing a problem.
Now, you mentioned Juul. Just very recently, they've come out with a piece of news saying that they are going to try to, or they are thinking about opening their own Juul store locations. And I know that hit the news. Similar to what they do with IQOS, and the heat not burn products and whatnot. Just very quickly, how does that strike you if Juul were to open their own stores?
Well, yeah, that was a Wall Street Journal story that came out today, and thank you, Bill Charling, for saying it to me. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know why that would be controversial, quite frankly. I mean, if it's a legal product, so if they're going to open their own store and they're going to, age restrict it, then more power to you. What I found disappointing about that story was hearing that Juul is saying that in those freestanding Juul stores, they will only stock menthol and what other one they were going to do, but they're none of their regular flavors, or like mint. Sorry, not mint. So none of their regular flavors. They're just going to keep to the FDA non-kid friendly flavors. Why would you do that if you're opening up your own stores and you're doing that? Well, then put your mango in there, put your fruit in there. That's where adults can go then to buy the product.
Yep.
So to me, I mean, I think Juul's a really good product. And I think that, the ubiquity that you get from, gas and grocery and everything else is essential to really, turning vaping into, getting smokers off. And I think that if the playing field was fair. And I mean that the entire news media and education system and government wasn't completely, totally spoiled with this anti-vaping propaganda. Like, just, I want to use harsher words, but I'm going to be very careful on that. But it's just poison. It's horrendous, the things that have been said and how far the scientists and will go to bastardize their findings, if you can call them that, in the effort to demonize vaping, right? It's just absolutely, it's one of the most horrific things I've ever seen. And yet, so if that was all gone, I don't think Juul would be a threat to open systems, because it's going to get people that are smokers. There's millions and millions and millions and millions of them that are not flocking to open systems. So if you can turn them into vapors with Juul, and then, because let's say you're in the US, you can still market, not like in Canada, for instance, maybe, but in the US you can. So then the whole open systems community can switch from trying to convert smokers into vapors, because there's millions of vapors they already converted, and then there's tens of millions more vapors that have been converted through ease and ubiquity of Juul, and then you can market them to them and say, want to step up, you want, all these different things. Plus there'll be innovation and everything else. So, but right now what we've seen is that this demonization, this overregulation, this completely, totally is unbalancing the natural marketplace. And so that's the fear. And it could very well actually destabilize the marketplace for good. So.
And I would agree, because Juul has the capability to create change unlike a lot of other products that have ever come before it, or even open systems that might come along now. When Juul hit the market, it took things by storm. There's no doubt about it. And it is a love-hate relationship for a lot of people. I'm one of the people, I'm like you. It is a product that helps people stop smoking. Therefore, it is a good thing. Do I personally like them? No, because I think they've gone about things the wrong way. But it's a business model. These are folks that are from Silicon Valley that created a resolution to an issue that they saw, and it's perfect. But that leads me right to our last question for the evening. You brought up a piece that came out, if I'm not mistaken, today, sometime, from the Truth Initiative. What can you tell me about that?
Right. I'll switch the feed over here to my computer. So do you got that?
Yep.
All right. Yeah. So, the key thing about this, I think that's important. Now, the Truth Initiative has its weekly newsletter. And if you aren't signed up for it, and you're into self, hatred and pain, and you want to whip yourself, with a birch branch, do it, sign up for it. But what I found was interesting is that in this week's one, they had an article that says, "Where does e-cigarette regulation stand today?" And this is a bit more in depth. It's always filled with some propaganda from Truth. You can count on that. But this, what I found very interesting was that, it does its standard, epidemic proportions, it, lays it out, brings Juul up right away in the second paragraph here. Juul, which accounts for 3/4 of the U.S. e-cigarette market, is driving the epidemic. Okay, thank you. And some of the highest nicotine content, great. So, hitting kid-friendly flavors, of course, which they highlight. But what I found really interesting here, despite the high stakes, these products have so far been allowed to stay on the market, nearly unchecked. In 2017, the FDA decided to allow e-cigarettes to remain on the market through 2022 without its review, and it has not made moves to reverse this decision. That means e-cigarettes on sale today have not undergone a review of their public health impact through the agency's review process for tobacco products. So, and here's where it gets interesting. Considering they basically get in there and they say that while they were expecting the new FDA commissioner to follow up on Dr. Gottlieb's proposal to really jump in there and attack vaping, because as we know, Gottlieb has also come out this month and said that the FDA got it wrong on vaping and that they didn't strike the right balance.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the Truth Initiative jumping in and basically says that after taking over the agency in March, acting FDA Commissioner Ned Sharpless signaled that he will not take immediate action to stem the epidemic. And this is according to a press release from Senator Dick Durbin, who, of course, is anti-vaping in a big way. So what we have here is basically an admission by the Truth Initiative that they don't believe that there's going to be immediate action from the new FDA commissioner, the acting FDA commissioner. And also, too, as well, is that now here on the legal actions from the FDA, and now this is following up with the judge's ruling also earlier this month that basically ruled and says that the FDA must enforce its regulations. They are also basically saying that they don't believe that that's going to happen. And so they're calling attention. So they're calling attention to that fact and doing a rallying cry amongst their supporters to get involved to help push the FDA to take action. And they wouldn't be doing that if they thought that there was going to be any kind of an immediate response from the FDA in their favor with regard to the ruling. So that's at least my take.
And that's what I'm looking at it and hearing as well, that they have suddenly become very defensive, which means their outlook is not in their favor, that things are swinging in a very different direction.
Yeah, something's going on in the background. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not 100% on this, but the flavor bill, it did get pulled, correct?
I believe so, yes. And
right, and so that's going to be impacting what's going on here.
Yeah. There are people in the chat that would be able to answer that a lot quicker than I could. But that was one part that you said earlier, just in the pre-show, that really caught my attention, is that the FDA, it appears to them, the acting commissioner is not going to do anything until 2021.
That's right.
And it turns around and he says he's not going to obey, if you will, a ruling from a judge. They're going to take steps to do whatever they need to do about that. And it's going to be as things had been laid out previously.
Right. But again, it's important to note, though, this could just be a tactic on their part, of course, right? But what it does say, though, is that they're feeling at least even just a modicum of unsureness in terms of where things are going, right? So that's, so they're hitting it on. They also talked about Tobacco 21 here, too. So This was unusual. Usually it's very single focused stories that they do. Like I said, real propaganda. This one was explanatory. It covered like all of the top major issues that are going on right now. And they've left me wondering how sure they are about moving forward. They're not sure.
And that's okay, as long as they're uncertain what they're doing. There's at least a fighting chance for other things to really come about.
Right.
Well, Brent,
it's just important. Don't get lulled into a false sense of security. That's
yes, apathy is not the right answer, folks. Brent,
yeah. Just the last thing, Mike.
Yes.
Before you do that, I just wanted to share that there is a line. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. So they're good. So when you're looking at this kind of stuff and the battle they're fighting, I mean, in their mind, they're a revolutionary, force, right? And I mean, obviously, to get rid of stamping out smoking is a revolution, and we're part of that. The anti-vaping force is the anti-smoking force. So for them, that's why they can dissemble. That's why they can lie. That's why they can bend science. That's why everything, because none of that matters. The issues don't matter. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. And as long as the revolution is moving forward, then that's all they care about.
That's a very, very well said thing. And a perfect point for us to wrap up for the evening, because we've gone over our hour. Brent, I seriously appreciate you taking time to be on the show this evening. It has been a pleasure. Just an amazing hour. There is no doubt about it.
Thank you for having me.
For everybody that is watching, listening, is going to be listening to the podcast, this is the executive director of Regulator Watch and regulatorwatch.com. In the comment section is a link from Bill Tarling on how to get to regulatorwatch.com. If you have the inclination, please go and support Regulator Watch, because what they do is important. They can't do it for free. It's impossible. Take your time, make a donation, help support things. And Brent, I hope at some point in time, as more news comes out, that we can take another hour and sit and chat and educate people.
Absolutely, Mike. I really appreciate it. And thank you for all your support, too.
Oh, anytime. It has been a pleasure. So, ladies and gentlemen, another edition of Vaping in the Mic. We will be back again next week. But this evening, you've been listening to Brent Stafford with RegulatorWatch.com. I hope everybody has a great weekend. We'll see you again next week.